Which film?
Milpital Monster, I never saw it.
Oh, the Milpitas Monster. Oh, yeah. I know, it's always written up with that. It was a very low-budget monster film made independently near San Francisco. And the writer of that film was another USC student, so I knew him. And they wanted sound effects for this. It had a big creature that was sort of like an enormous bat that had wings, and it was like a King Kong suit with wings. And it climbed a large tower. It was a spoof, really, of low-budget monster movies, and they needed sounds for that movie. So I made up a bunch of different, a whole library for them of monster roars and explosions and electricity and things that happened in the movie. That film still plays, actually. It was filmed in Milpitas, California, a very small town outside, maybe 60 miles from San Francisco. And every year they have a screening of that film at the local theater, still, and that's its only venue. I'm going to just say it's a crudely made film, but it has a charm, and in fact they just restored it, and now it's on Blu-ray. So my contribution there was a lot of monster roars. Actually, I was in a hurry at that time, and I used some actual material from King Kong, which I had collected from some of the dinosaurs from that movie had survived the sounds of them on nitrate film, which I found in an archive and copied off onto analog and used it.
And then Star Wars, the movie that I think changed your life. How did Star Wars come to you?
Well, while I was finishing my degree in film production at USC, George Lucas, who had been a student at USC 4 or 5 years earlier, I had not met him. I knew who he was. He was a kind of hero to us because he was a student filmmaker who now is out making movies. And he was planning this film. At that time it was called The Star Wars, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller. That was the title that I was introduced to, but he had his producer, Gary Kurtz, call USC and say, yeah, do you have another Walter Murch? That's what they said, because Walter Murch had been doing the sound for George. He was also a former student, but Walter was now busy with working for Francis Coppola. So I was a replacement, so to speak. And they talked to the department, and I was recommended for the job. They said, yeah, we have this guy, Burtt, or whoever he is. And I knew that they wanted someone cheap, okay, which is fine, that's the way movies are made. You get your best deal. And George Lucas had his own ideas about the process he wanted to use, and I think he wanted someone to work in sound who could be trained in his methodology. He didn't want someone who had a lot of experience, let's say, and had habits that he didn't want, attitudes about how to do things. He wanted a fresh start with someone. So I was interviewed for the job, and on the second meeting, I met George Lucas, and in his office, they actually had an office at Universal Studios at that time. They were in the Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh bungalow, formerly. And they showed me a wall of paintings by Ralph McQuarrie, who was a concept artist for Star Wars. All these shots of the various spaceships and the Death Star, and there was in particular a shot of a lightsaber fight between Vader and Ben Kenobi. And of course I looked at those and I said, I've made some of this in my backyard already, when I was a kid. Same kind of idea. So I really felt I understood what that film was all about, and I got very excited. They wanted me to make, they just talked about one sound actually, that they wanted to develop the sound for Chewbacca, the Wookiee, prior to shooting. This is a year before they actually were out shooting. That was the foresight that Lucas had. And they wanted to work on the sounds for Chewbacca so that they knew when they got to the set and filming eventually that they had some idea how the sound and the performance that they'd be directing would work together. Because the Chewbacca costume, the mask, had some animation to it. And yet it was limited to just sort of a mouth opening and closing, a little bit like Muppet at that time. And so the sound had to match up with those kind of facial animation. So I started working on Chewie. And they gave me a script, which is something they don't do nowadays. You never get the script anymore, it's just a secret. But I read through it and I noticed there were a few hundred other things to be done. Sand people and lightsabers and robots. And I asked them, do you want me to work on all of these other objects? And they said, yeah, okay, go ahead. You know, they gave me a nice Swiss tape recorder, a Nagra, and set me off. And I just started making appointments to go to zoos and factories and airfields to record anything of interest.
And now